Good afternoon, everyone. As we wait for people to connect, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Rachel Rosen. I'm the Communications Director for Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our entire staff, our President, Mark Melman, our board and our board co-chairs, Todd Richmond and Ann Lewis, who are on the call today, welcome. We hope you and your loved ones are well and are safe, and like you, our thoughts are with the people in Israel today. In just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to DMFI board member Barry Porter to introduce our distinguished guest. But first, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you like what you're hearing today, please consider following us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We have a website, dmfi.org. You can check out our news and updates and sign up for our newsletter there. If you want to ask a question today, you can submit it through the Q&A feature on your Zoom interface. And if you're on Facebook, just type it into the comment section. With that, I'm going to turn it over to DMFI board member Barry Porter to introduce our distinguished guest today. Barry?
Thank you, Rachel, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Pleased to hear we have a very large group. As Rachel said, our thoughts are with the people of Israel and all the innocent lives that have been lost. While there are life and death stakes in this conflict for those living in the region, there's another war happening, one which targets Israel online and in social media. That is why we're so privileged to have with us today someone who's on the front lines of that battle, and why it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Noa Tishby. In our town here in Los Angeles, it's high praise for someone to be called a so-called Hollywood hyphenate. And Noa is all that as a producer, actor, and author, but importantly, also as an activist. Noa was born and raised in Tel Aviv and served 2.5 years in the Israeli army before landing a starring role on Israel's highest rated primetime drama, Ramat Aviv Gimel. She became a household name, appearing in numerous TV shows, films, theater productions, and national fashion campaigns before moving to Los Angeles, where she sold the Israeli TV show In Treatment to HBO, making history as the first Israeli television show to become an American series. She co-produced over 150 episodes, which earned a Peabody Award and 12 Emmy and Golden Globe nominations. A passionate political activist, Noa founded the nonprofit Act for Israel, Israel's first online advocacy organization, and has become widely known as Israel's unofficial ambassador. Noa's new book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, chronicles her homeland's evolution, beginning in biblical times and moving forward to cover everything from World War I to Israel's creation to the real disputes dividing the country today. Tackling popular misconceptions with an abundance of facts, Noa creates an accessible and dynamic portrait of a tiny country of outsized relevance. And during the events of the last 2 weeks, Noa has been engaged in the social media war on Israel. She's been a fierce and frequent influencer, regularly making the case for Israel's right to defend herself. On behalf of the Democratic Majority for Israel board, staff, and supporters, we're thrilled to be able to hear more about her activism, as well as this important book. Please join me in welcoming Noa Tishby. Noa, I think you're on mute. There we go.
Yes, there you go. It's great to be here with everybody. Unfortunately, in very stressful and violent times. I wish I can see everybody's faces. Let's see who's here. I'm gonna talk a little bit. It feels a little bizarre to discuss a book in times like this, but this talk was scheduled before everything started happening in Israel. And the thing that distresses me the most is how not surprised I am. I'm not surprised, obviously, at the conflict, because as we know, these things are cyclical and they start and then they calm down and then they start again because of various reasons, which we can and should address later on in this talk. But the reason I wrote this book is because as a liberal, excuse me, everything else is turned off except for my phone on my computer, which can't be turned off, so I apologize. The reason I wrote this book is because as a liberal, I've seen the conversation around Israel shift in the last over a decade in ways which I identified as acute, deep-rooted, and very dangerous. I saw everything that's happening now, and I saw it shifting from the beginning of this cute misunderstandings about Israel, right? Like, is it modern? Is it not modern? Like, what kind of a country is it? To literally, yes, but is it a state though, or is it a settler colonialist endeavor? And I've seen this happen for a very long time. I heard this in living room conversations within my group of friends. I travel obviously in very liberal circles because of the profession I'm at, because of my personal general opinions. I've seen this happen in talks that I was given. I've seen this happen online with like thought leaders. And I realized that so much of it is actual manipulation. Like, this is not, I say this in the book, this is not by accident, it's by design. And B, lack of knowledge. Like, literally, I'm pretty sure that everybody on this call can run down the history of what went down and how we got to this place, but the majority of everybody else does not. And this, in like this infusion of progressivism and liberalism and hip social justice Coachella driven kind of cause, and infusing that with a Palestinian cause, which to me is blessed, because being pro-Israeli, you're pro-Palestinian, and being a Zionist and being liberal does not negate wanting to for everybody to have their self-determination and empowered as a nation. But I've seen this turn into this kind of like fashionable cause that is devoid of facts, yet catching on like a house on fire. And it's almost, I apologize. I'm usually way more chipper. And if you read my book or read my book, I'm very irreverent and kind of take the piss at everything and very kind of like, tongue in cheek. And right now I feel like this is Mayday. Like, this is what I'm telling to people. Like, do you want to talk right now? No. Is it Mayday? No, can't talk right now, because this is not surprising what had been happening on social media and offline, but it's the level of it, the strength of it, and the dangers are surprising. Last night, I was having dinner with a group of friends, like-minded people. We were actually having dinner talking about what can be done, what can we do, kind of like a small little task force that we started. And we were a block away from La Cienega, that sushi place on La Cienega where the attack happened. And in the middle of the dinner, we got these videos and calls, and a friend of one of the girls that was in the meeting, in the dinner, he was there and he was taking one of these videos. So having it move from how do we relate to Israel as a country, as a state, as a liberal entity, as a conservative entity, how do we relate to it, to like death to Jews, that jump from like defund the police to cancel Israel happened. It's already going on, and the conflict had just landed on a very fertile ground. I've warned about this. I've spoken to people in the Israeli government about this. I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and I spoke about this in the Israeli press, and people didn't quite get what I was talking about, because there has been calm for so many years, and like Israel won over COVID, the first country in the world that eradicated COVID with vaccines. And there's been this sense of like, oh, Israel's not that interesting to anybody anymore. And I was like, no, there's a massive shift in the perception of Israel and its legitimacy and its right to exist as a Jewish state. This has been going on. And here it is. We're dealing with it. It caused all these anti-Semitic attacks here and in Europe. And it's of grave concern. So I think there are two separate things, and I'd love to actually, you guys, open this up to questions quicker, because I can talk about this till the cows come home, but I want to hear where people are at in terms of their thought process. But there are two things that needs to be done right now. Number one is taking care of this Mayday, this war situation that's happening right now, and attack that. And that's what I'm doing. It's what I'm doing on my social media, and that's what I'm doing with anybody I can. And once this calms down, there has to be a strategic long-term plan to recreate what Israel means to the world and realign it with liberal values. Because for all of Israel's faults, and there are many, right? I'm the last person, and I say that in the book as well, like I'm the last person to give Israel a free pass. Still, negating the Jewish people, their own self-determination and liberation in their own state, and doing so only for one particular nation is a big problem. So, and one particular people is a huge problem. So I know that we've all had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about being democratic and also supporting Israel. I know we all know the allies that we have in Washington and around the world, but we definitely need to work on this and build this as a long-term strategy. It was one of the reasons that I wrote this book, in order to address that. There's literally nothing that is happening right now in the zeitgeist, nothing that we see in like Bella Hadid's social media posts, nothing that we're seeing out there that has not been addressed in the book. And it's, again, I'm a little shook by this and trying to, hi, Rachel, you're back.
I know I am. Please,
yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Listen, I can talk about this. I can talk about this, for forever. I'm very much in kind of like a war zone right now. I'm not stopping to think, what does all of this mean? My friend asked me the other day, she's like, but how are you doing? And I'm like, don't ask me. Like, my family is in bomb shelters. My friends are attacked here. I'm attacked. I'm getting death threats. Jews are attacked on Lysanik. Don't ask me right now how I'm doing. Let's fight this fight right now and then figure out what to do next. So I'd love to open it up for questions and open it up for a discussion, because this is, again, Rachel, you obviously, I wrote the book before all this was happening. I just kind of pointed out to like a massive problem that we have. And now it's like, oh, like literally I'm getting calls from my friends. They're like, I didn't realize it's that bad. I just thought it's my ex-wife friend, extreme friends. And I'm like, no, it isn't. So here we are.
Noa, you've been very active on social media, and there's clearly a lot of disinformation out there. What's your sort of strategy to when you decide what battles to wage, when to weigh in, and what to say?
The strategy is, well, first of all, there is no strategy right now other than this is whack-a-mole, right? So right now it's about seeing what's in the zeitgeist. What are people talking about? My recent video was a rebuttal to John Oliver, which again, it was so disheartening for all of us, because we were like, wait, what? We love him. But I posted a video answering his questions. The next one is going to be, from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free, and what that means. So there's no real strategy right now. There's literally seeing what's out there and attacking that with what I call the cunning use of facts.
Can you give us some examples of instances where you have weighed in? I mean, tell us, I think our audience would be interested to know. You mentioned one video. What about Twitter? It's particularly ugly on Twitter.
I'm pretty, I'm only like outgoing on Twitter, right? I try not to engage. Twitter is a cesspool. It really is. If you wrestle with pigs, you're only going to get covered in shit, and the pig's going to love it. So I try to, stay away from, I'll post stuff on Twitter and link it to my Instagram and stuff like that, but I try to not get into it because it's not going to help. And those people that are on Twitter that are aggressively against Israel and against Jews, they're not going to be convinced by me tweeting at them, right? So I try to not do that. I write very kind of thoughtful op-eds or thoughtful videos that I know nobody can catch me in, oh, she's wrong about that. So for example, the Jon Stewart thing, one of his major points in his monologue was that he was like, well, yeah, but one side is suffering 10 times more casualties than the other side, and that's just wrong. And I'm like, yes, of course one side is suffering 10 times more the casualties, and that's horrific, but it's because Hamas doesn't invest in protecting their population. So it's like, are you saying that you're going to feel more connected to the Israeli cause and feel and identify with Israel more if like more Jews would die? Like Israel created the Iron Dome exactly because every couple of years they'd have rockets landing on her head from Gaza. So like, of course she would do that. So then I tweeted yesterday that, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly how I put it, but Israel uses its rockets to protect its citizens, and Hamas uses its citizens to protect its rockets. And that is like, I said that in the video as well. It's very hard for normal people in the West to understand that we're dealing with an enemy who would literally do that, like that it's not hyperbole. It's very hard for people to understand. They don't, it's kind of like it doesn't compute. So whoever has been in the region, or like veterans, right? The other day I went to a birthday party of a friend of mine, and again, very, very progressive circle, very, probably the most progressive of the circle of friends that I have. And I was like, I went there with my son, and I'm like, I'm just gonna take a break. I'm not gonna bring any of this up. I'm not gonna talk to anybody about this because I'm never gonna get out of it, right? But there was a veteran there who was a Marine for 10 years and did 2 tours in Iraq and a bunch of them in Africa. And he grabbed me and he sat down and he's like, oh my God, they don't know what they're talking about. And he was even a bit more extreme, but he knows the culture and he knows what we're dealing with. And it's, you can't compare them. You can't say, you just, it's just not the same. So it's very frustrating.
No, I know you recently signed a letter with other celebrities and Hollywood types. Could you talk about the letter and what its message was and what you hope it will accomplish?
Well, the message was that we condemn violence, and but we also want to have everybody kind of take a step back and also condemn Hamas and be more specific about that rather than bashing Israel, which is national sports, especially in celebrity circles. But what do I hope to achieve from that letter? None of us were under any illusion that it would actually achieve anything. This was more of a symbolic act. It was beautiful to see. It was like 125 entertainment people from both behind and in front of the camera who signed on to this. People like Chaim Saban and Sherry Lansing and Jonathan Tucker and Meghan McCain and Gene Simmons and there were Micah Bublé. There were a lot of people that signed on to this letter, but again, it's going to make no difference. It's not going to make a dent. Again, right now we got to combat misinformation and certainly anti-Semitism, certainly. And when everything calms down again, hopefully soon, we'll need to strategize long-term and see what are we going to do about this, because a long-term strategy is very much needed.
To that point, Noah, Mark asks, what can we liberal American Jews do?
In what sense?
Is there anything, do you think that the pro-Israel Democratic community can be doing right now?
It's a great question. The first thing to understand, and it's heartbreaking, right, is that we're always going to be responsible for each other, right? Like there's not going to be enough. There's always a sense with us, with Jews, and I was that person, right? You read the book. The beginning of my book is that. I'm not Jewish. I'm like Israeli, and I'm a globalist. I'm like everything and everyone. I'm the same as everybody else. And then this realization that the world is never going to accept it that way, and then going into history and seeing that like Herzl tried this. People tried this, and anti-Semitism keeps coming up. So the first thing to remember is that it's not going anywhere, right? And the other thing to remember is that as a liberal, the thing that we always, not we, because I particularly specifically not, but the thing that a lot of liberals would do, when they have the urge to help Palestinians, which is a blessed urge and needs to be done, is to bash Israel, to jump immediately to, I want to help the Palestinian cause, therefore I'm going to talk about how terrible Israel is. It's not helping anybody. Like, this is really not helping anybody. It's like, it's promoting anti-Semitism. It's promoting like the delegitimization of Israel. Like, if we want as liberal to actually help something in the Middle East and help Israel and help the Palestinian people, start figuring out ways to empower Palestinian people, to empower the liberals within the Palestinian community, to get them to get more investments in their education system, in helping them create more jobs, and calling for Palestinian leadership, for responsible Palestinian leadership. Like, this is not helping. This bashing of Israel is not helping anybody. We all know that there's enough voices in Israel that wants to get this resolved, right? Everybody, we all know this. And we all know that the majority of Palestinian people would be like, can we just live in peace already? But there's lack of leadership within the Palestinian Authority is, moderate, but weak. Hamas is a threat for the entire region. Hamas is basically Iran. And you're just weakening Israel and weakening the legitimacy of the country as a Jewish state by these constant attacks.
Now, Miranda asks something that you've written extensively about in your book. Can you address Israel as the Jewish-only state and the apartheid arguments?
Oh, well, yes. So first of all, it's important, and again, I'm sure I'm speaking to a highly educated in the subject crowd, so I may be kind of preaching to the choir or repeating myself, but it's very important to say the following, because there's been an argument about Zionism, right, to begin with. Zionism is a movement for Jewish liberation and self-determination in a Jewish, yet not an exclusively Jewish state. That's it. From the founding documents of Zionism, from Alt Neuland by Herzl, he wrote in 1902, he's addressing the Arab citizens living in Israel and like peaceful coexistence. In the declaration, the Israeli Declaration of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, which is basically mirroring the American Declaration of Independence. It was written by a Purple Heart recipient, an American rabbi, Rabbi Solomon. That he wrote the first draft of American independence of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, very similar to the American Declaration of Independence, and it called on the Arab citizens and Arab residents and the Arab neighbors, like in the founding documents. So there has never been a desire to have an exclusively Jewish state. Never, never. And this is kind of like a reappropriation of the word Zionism by the progressives, saying anti-Zion. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. It's like, no, but Zionism is not, never talked about exclusivity, right? So this is the first thing to understand. And in terms of apartheid, right? The problem is that people would say stuff like Israel's an apartheid state, would blanket kind of the entire country as that. And what you need to do is, first of all, separate the West Bank from Israel, the Green Line. Within Israel, as we know, calling Israel as an apartheid state is ridiculous. You want to have a conversation about the West Bank, you can definitely have a conversation about the West Bank, but know that it's a different entity. It has different governance system. It's a military rule. It's never been annexed. It works according to the Geneva Accord. Yes, and yes, there is a problem there within who has more rights than who. Now there's a question, why isn't that a Palestinian state yet? There's enough blame to go around, but you can't place the blame entirely on Israel. Because the reason that is not Palestine yet, like why isn't Palestine liberated and free? It does not lay within Israel only. Now, to call Israel an apartheid state when the third largest party in the Israeli governance system is Arab, when an Arab judge sentenced the former Israeli president to prison, when 20.1% or 20.8% of doctors and nurses in Israeli hospitals are Arabs, when there's like coexistence and equal rights within Israel to its Arab citizens, it's slander. Like it's ridiculous. So that's the thing to understand when people call Israel's an apartheid state. Separate the two. So it's important for people to understand that and also to answer for people when they have an issue with that.
There's a part in your book, Noa, where you talk about not even realizing anti-Semitism was still a thing. I think you were 17 years old and you went with a friend to Athens. Can you share that story with us?
Oh my God. Dude, it's true. Like, it's so true. I was so shocked. So living in Israel as a liberal, I'm like, my family like was on the like left of the spectrum, right? Living in Israel, I was like, anti-Semitism, oh, that shit was settled, pardon my French. That was settled in World War II. Like nobody actually thinks that anymore, right? So I was 17 years old. I was traveling to Greece, to this island called Ios, which is this, small island outside, near the Greek island, small Greek island, which was kind of like a party central at the time. And we were on a boat, me and my girlfriend were on a boat, this kind of like overnight ferry that you take from Athens to Ios. And a guy hit on me. Right. So this guy comes up to me, he's very tall, he's very blonde, he's very cute. And we're like chatting, whatever. And we walk on the deck and we sit down, we start talking. And at some point this comes up and he says, where are you from? And I say, Israel. And I say, where are you from? And he says, Germany. And I'm kind of like, okay, great. And then I see him getting weird. He's kind of like, you know, he has this kind of like bizarre reaction. And I look at him and I'm kind of thinking that has to do something with like our, you know, our nation's past and all of that. And I trying to lighten things up, and I go, you know, well, if you're weirded out about like what had happened, obviously this was, you know, this was terrible, but happened a long time ago. We just have to make sure that we forget, you know, we'll never forget, always remember, and make sure this doesn't happen again. Like, our country's made huge progress since then. And he just looked at me and flat out said, well, we're not sure this actually happened. I mean, there are a lot of books that say that it didn't happen. And, you know, even if it did happen, you guys took all the money we gave you and you used it for your wars. And I was shocked, obviously. I've never heard anything like that. I've never heard anybody negating the Holocaust that blatantly and that flat out. And I never heard anybody who had, this was so, this was horrific. It was anti-Semitic. It was horrific. It was misunderstood. It was dangerous. Obviously, I tell in the book, I was like blown away. I felt like an ice bucket was thrown on my face, and I was just like walking. I just kind of excused myself and walked back to my girlfriend, and I was like, "Did you know that people still think that way?" And also, he's not getting anywhere near lucky. So that was my first interaction. Obviously, I've learned very quickly that anti-Semitism has always been around and is always going to be around. I also talk about, you know, the book that I always pronounce his name wrong. So I'm going to pronounce it in Hebrew and just help me out here. Josephus Flavius? Flavius. They know who I'm talking about. He was a historian of the, you know, in the old Jewish Roman War. And in 70 AD, he wrote all the books about describing the rebellion and the destruction of Jerusalem. And in the year 70 AD, after the Jewish Roman War, he was living in Rome, still a very proud Jew, but living under the emperor. And he wrote a book called The Antiquity of the Jews in 70 AD. And he wrote that in order to fight pagan anti-Semitism. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So in 70, he already felt the urge to write a book to fight against anti-Semitism. So it's kind of like, this always keeps coming back. Because people have subconscious biases about everything, so they also have subconscious biases about Jews, and that subconscious bias, I venture to say that subconscious bias is affecting their opinion about Israel, and it's often based on feelings, not facts.
Noa, Joel says, first, your book is excellent.
Thank you.
And my question is, are you able to extend your activism to university campuses where the problem is particularly toxic?
This is definitely one of my main goals. As Joel and you, Rachel, know, I have a whole chapter there about BDS, in which I'm ripping them a new a-hole. A lot of what we're seeing right now is a very thorough, thoughtful, and successful work done by BDS throughout the years. They have infiltrated our campuses in order to shift public opinion slowly, just one future voter at a time. And they've been doing it at clear sight. So I am talking to Hillel. They have been great supporters of the book. They read it and they called me up and they're like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need. I'm like, I know. And hopefully we can get this. We already got this to the hands of in some colleges, and we hope to be able to get it to more. I definitely wrote that with like the Hillel and the birthrights kids, or like young adults in mind. Those were my campus. I wrote this for my people, because I knew this doesn't exist. A book like that doesn't exist. So yeah, and any help you can all offer would be great. This definitely needs to, this is it's ammunition for anybody who has a hunch that they should support Israel, but not sure how to verbalize it or why. That's what I wrote the book about and for.
I think that chapter was called WTF BDS. Part of what? So would you tell our audience what you wrote about specifically?
So yeah, the chapter is called BDS, and the first subchapter is called WTF.
Yes.
Is BDS. It's just explaining people. The thing about BDS is this, right? BDS is I'm sorry, there's a truck outside. I hope it's not too loud. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which we all heard about, is a movement that had reemerged And I say reemerged because it was recreated in 2005. But when you look back at history, you see that the movement to boycott Jewish goods has been around since before the establishment of the country, actually. Since 1945 was the first Arab League initiative decision to boycott Jewish goods, because that's the best use of their time at the time. So it's been, and then the Arab League boycott, and this has been around for a very long time. And in 2005, they basically rebranded themselves as this kind of woke cause, right? So they dropped. When you look back at the people behind BDS, the people who actually sponsored this, the people who founded it, they come from a strain of a nationalistic and uncompromising nationalistic Palestinian cause. They are a lot of the people that are in the movement and sponsors of the movement and board members have been involved in an organization called the Holy Land Foundation. The Holy Land Foundation in 2011 was dismantled by the FBI, and 7 of its members were of its heads were sentenced to federal prison. 2 of them fled the country. 5 of them are actually serving federal prison right now because they were found to have funneled $12.5 million to Hamas. So the same people who sponsored terrorism have kind of dismantled, and a lot of them re-emerged in this new organization called American Muslims for Peace, American Muslims for Peace, and they're the ones who sponsor BDS. There has been congressional hearings by the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, this guy, Jonathan Chasner, who's incredible, who has been, he's a terrorism finance expert, and he's been calling for investigation into the sources of funding. He's been calling into looking at those people, and he's been saying very plainly that American people need to understand who's behind their campus operation. Because right now, something is going on there in plain sight, and we don't understand what it is. Now, what BDS says that they are is a movement about this justice and peace, actually not peace. They don't mention the word peace anywhere in the literature, but like justice and freedom and Palestinian lives matter. But what they're actually about is dismantling Israel. And the founder, whom I will not name, the founder who founded it in 2005, he actually said that flat out. So he said, yeah, no, we're definitely not, we're not interested in a Jewish state anywhere in the land. And that is the thing that I have an issue with, because obviously we live in a free country. It's all good. If you want to say, I don't want Israel to exist, then you have a right to say that. I disagree vehemently, but okay. But the thing is that BDS are cloaking their dagger. They're doing this on purpose. So they're not saying, let's support terror. Let's dismantle Israel. Let's make a state which exists, not exist anymore, right? They're not saying that. They're using all these woke words like justice and da-da-da-da, and they're attracting all these liberals, including Jewish liberals, including Sarah Silverman, who posts this video and she says, well, am I for BDS? Yeah, of course I'm for BDS. And I'm like, no, you're not. You think you are, because that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that you are this, kind of woke movement, but they're not. They're a very, very dangerous movement. I would venture again to say that everything we're seeing right now is a cause of their work, their thorough work over time. So BDS needs to be ousted. Again, it's a free country. If you want to say that I don't want Israel to exist, you're allowed to do that, but don't hide your agenda, which is what they're doing. Luring all these liberals to their midst, thinking that they're doing the right thing. It's awful.
Now, we have a question from Sarah who asks, how do we speak with our own Jewish friends who are so angry, guilty, and ashamed of Israel? Every comment seems to devolve into the common media tropes.
Again, the main thing about, and I hear you, I have to talk to my liberal friends about that too. So I couldn't relate more. The thing, again, which is important to explain, is what the other side and what we're dealing with. Because, look, I have a lot of complaints for the Israeli government throughout the years and recently, no question about that. But when you're dealing with an enemy who, not only are they not afraid of dying, it's an actual goal, you can't win that. And we have to keep discussing values, what are the values that that Israel has, and what are the values that Hamas has, and what are the values that Iran has. And the thing is this as well, and I also talk about that in the book, Rachel, right? At the I talk about this kind of at the end of the book. and I say the push and pull between idealism and democracy, right? Between the idealism and reality, right? Is nowhere more apparent than in Israel. Like, it's very easy to sit in your like People Republic of Berkeley or in Seattle or in London or whatever, wherever, and be like, oh my God, this is horrible. But like, try living in a state in which 30 miles from your house, like a wannabe Sharia state is being formed that is committed to your destruction, that is oppressing its own population, that is preventing from them the schooling and the protection and the human rights. How are we supposed to deal with that? And you kind of ask those people these questions, like what would you, without being like, without attacking even, like, what would you suggest that Israel do? What would you suggest how would you react to rockets? How would you react to, I also recommend people, and I again talk about that in the book as well. I recommend people to read the Charter of Hamas. It's out there. It's everywhere. It's not, these are one of the things that the information is all out there. The Charter of Hamas is not hidden. It's not some sort of a secret kind of handshake. It's out there for everybody to see. So you read the Charter of Hamas and you go, oh, okay, that's what Israel's dealing with. How would you deal with that? And when you're a liberal, it's even harder because you want to take the higher ground and you want to be as humane as possible, but it's very challenging. I never saw my recent tweet. There's a conversation between it was actually posted by an Arab Israeli. It's a kind of phone conversation between an IDF soldier calling this guy and saying, we're about to bomb and attack, evacuate, like get out. And the guy's like, it's okay, come on over, bomb us. And he's like, no, you have to get out. Like, we're about to, and he's like, no, we're good. We're good. And it's listened to the call. And it was posted by this guy, Yosef Haddad, who's a proud Arab Israeli. And it's horrific. It's horrific. So to convince normal people that this actually happens is a challenge. It's terrible.
No, you mentioned that social media post. What influencers should we be following? Who should we listen to maybe learn, and whose voice might we want to lift up?
Eve Barlow, Blake Flayton, Isaac DeCastro, who have created the new Zionist Congress, who are great. Lee Kern, who's a writer. He wrote Borat, the film. Those are the three that I can think of off the top of my head. Charlotte Bruchen, she's great. I mean, obviously Barry and all the incredible voices that we have out there, but those are kind of like the younger generation that we're all kind of huddled together and taking a lot of the heat.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And DMFI is very familiar with most of those folks, and I'll give a plug for follow DMFI as well. We are waging many of these battles, but also lifting up pro-Israel Democrats across the country, and specifically in Congress and in,
of course, Richie Torres, the king of all kings.
Yes, Richie Torres. I know he gave a nice blurb for your book. He also gave very eloquent remarks on the House floor over the past week, which was very moving, at least for me. Okay, so I'm going to go to a question from Marilyn. Part of the challenge resides inside of the Jewish community, particularly on the left, lack of knowledge regarding their own Jewish history, the fact that Israel isn't a priority issue, and so on and so on. What kind of experience and or work are you doing, or do you think needs to be done inside of the Jewish community itself?
Well, I understand this because it was the same for me. Again, I wasn't, I grew up in a secular family. I've never been to synagogue before coming to America. Like, I grew up in like my mom is from a kibbutz. My dad was born in Jerusalem. Like, they've been very, in my household, we never lit Shabbat candles or fasted or anything like that. So I know what it's like to be disconnected from your Jewish peoplehood, not even religion, because it's the peoplehood. I don't know enough. So my son is only now starting his Jewish education in America. He's in TK, so in the Jewish school. But from the sense that I'm getting from talking to my friends and reading and whatever, I think there's something about Jewish education that is lacking, that is turning a lot of the kids away rather than bringing them in. So from what I heard, and again, this is not my personal experience, it's just what I've picked up from friends and colleagues. There's the Sunday school thing that people hate, the kids hate, that you push it down their throat, and instead of getting them connected to their Jewishness, they kind of turn away from it. There's the, I think what Seth Rogen pointed out to was really telling, because he's obviously been unhelpful, to say the least. But he also said something on the first time when he was on that podcast, when he said, you know, does Israel need to exist? I don't know. Does it really? Do we want all the Jews in one place and they can kill us in one place? And I'm like, oh my God, how many wrong things in one line, right? First of all, nobody said that all the Jews need to be in one place. That's never been the strength of the Jewish people. We're the traveling Jew. We've always been everywhere. Whoever asked you to come to Israel all the time? Like, nobody's intending to have all the Jews in Israel, number one. Number two, so you don't think that a part of your confidence and stability and like sense that you can do anything and sense of kind of calm in the world is also stemming from the fact that you grew up having a Jewish state in the back of your mind? So there's some sort of something that's a subconscious kind of confidence that the Jews have that they may not kind of relate to because there's a Jewish state. And now they're taking it for granted, right? It's just taken for granted. But what he said that was telling is that he said that his parents lied to him. He said, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know, for example, he said very specifically, he said, I didn't know there were people there. And I heard that and I'm like, really? I mean, I was told that there were people there. I wasn't told that like the Jews showed up in something that was completely empty. Of course. So I'm like, that's really interesting. First of all, I'm just seeing the book behind you, Rachel. Oh, nice. I don't even have a book here with me. What's wrong with me? I'm sure I do. Oh, fine. It's behind Rachel. I wasn't told that. Like, don't lie to your kids. You can't, if you say to your son, to Seth, his parents say to him, the Jews came into the land of Israel. It was a British mandate and there was not a single person there. Obviously, when he grows up and realizes that's not true, he's going to discredit everything else you said to him. So I would say, reevaluate Jewish education. There are a lot of cool things about Judaism that are connected to the younger generation that are more spiritual and that are more kind of like astrologically driven and more kind of like the gratitude practice. That there are a lot of things about Judaism that are amazing that aren't that won't alienate kids. So first of all, reevaluate Jewish education and realign it to the new generation. And second thing, don't lie. Just don't lie to kids. It's gonna flip on us, as it is right now, flipping on us with Seth Rogen because he's got this big of a megaphone. So,
Noah, Roberta says, great book for our book club. So there's a lot of interest there. You talked about what Seth Rogen said about, we didn't know that there were people in the land of Israel before 1948. Your family, from what I remember in your book, was there before Israel was a state. So can you talk a little bit about their journey for us?
Yeah, I talk about them a lot in the book, obviously. And I the intention was to create to tell the story of Israel through the story of my family, right? Which were heavily involved in establishing the country. So my grandparents and great grandparents came to the British Mandate of Palestine in the 1922, 1920, 1934. I don't remember exactly the years, but like every one of them kind of was either, my great grandfather came because he was in England at the time and he was offered a job at a Jewish agency to start the Ministry of Industry and Trade in Jerusalem. So he took that job and he started the Ministry of Industry and Trade, and he was the one who brought all this industry into Israel, the diamond industry, the marble industry, the textile industry. I'm actually wearing a shirt by Ata right now, which is one of my favorite Israeli brands. And he helped establish that factory, which was such a delight to realize. My grandmother was one of the founders of the first kibbutz in Israel, Ganya. And and she was like a full-on farmer socialist, wanted nothing to do with money, as opposed to my great-grandfather, who was like a full-on capitalist, right? So my grandmother was incredible woman, and her dream was to live in a kibbutz, and she fulfilled that dream and worked the land. All she wanted to do was work with her bare hands, work the land. And she got to do that for her entire life. And my grandfather was, he was not only the first ambassador to Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Ivory Coast, he was actually the first representative the state of Israel sent to the entire continent of Africa. So in 1956, in March of 1956, he was sent there it was called the Gold Coast, before it was Ghana, before it was established and liberated from British colonialism. And he helped spearhead the relationship of Israel and Africa in the days where it was like the golden age of that relationship. So they came because of Zionism and because of persecution. My grandmother's family was pushed out of Czechoslovakia. They all felt the heat and caught the bug of Zionism, which was radical at the time. There were a bunch of radicals.
Noah, Michelle asks if you're planning to do another room on Clubhouse, and if so, when, and can you give a brief explain about what Clubhouse is for folks?
Michelle, can you say yes or no? Were you there in the big Clubhouse room? At some of it, at least?
I don't know that Michelle she wouldn't be able to.
Okay, anyway.
Okay.
Wow. So, the answer is yes. All right. So I'll just give a quick brief about. So Clubhouse is a new audio in app. It's kind of like there's an online. There are these rooms happening, which people start the room and they get on stage, a virtual stage, and then people could just jump in and listen in the room and raise their hand and speak in the room. It's audio only, and just imagine it's an application which is online ongoing podcasts. So just a bunch of people talking and yapping. I love that app. Actually, haven't been on it all week because it's been very challenging. But I think what she's referring to was last week, when everything was starting to happen, I called my two friends who I do an ongoing room there. And I'm like, we have to jump on. So we jumped on. My two friends, Shani Suisa and Danielle Ames Spivak, two other amazing warriors of the cause. And we started a room called like Updates from Israel. And we started a room at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we ended it at 12:30 at night. So we had a room open for 13 and a half hours. In every moment in time, any given moment, there were no less than 1,000 people in that room. It reached, 1,000, 1,400, 1,500, 1,200, no more than 1,000 people. We planned on only having that room be an hour or two, and we just kept canceling everything throughout the day because we're like, we can't close a room that has, 1,000 people in it. It was a very intense and thoughtful conversation. We brought a lot of, I basically see an Arab name and I bring him on stage immediately to have a conversation. So it was one guy that was speaking, and his name is Muhammad, and he said, I actually just want to say thank you for like how many Muhammads you have here on stage. And I'm like, of course, like the liberal thing to do is not to cancel. Like it's to bring into the conversation. And there were some contested discussions there, obviously, but we can handle all of them. By the end of that day, we had over 52,000 people coming in and out of that room. It was the largest room on Clubhouse that week by landslide, like by far. And because of everything that's been going on, I focus more on videos and on writings and on talking and moving the ball forward and in other ways. But yes, I definitely need to hop on Clubhouse again, but I don't know when. I mean, tomorrow at noon Pacific time, from noon to 2, we have a room called Hummus Thursdays. We've been holding this room for like 3-4 months now. So we're going to do that. And so, come on to that, and then it may continue more than 2 hours, but who knows?
All right. Noah, we have, Tamara says, I've been requesting your book at all the libraries. I have 4 library cards, so hopefully she will awesome. Be successful. Okay, and I'll try to get another question or so in before we have to wrap up. Todd asks, I saw my first Palestinian Lives Matter flag today. What are the best social justice words to use in defense of Israel's right to equally coexist? Israelis' lives matter too.
The problem with Israelis' lives matter or Jewish lives matter is that it can be perceived as all lives matter, which even though without context, that sentence makes sense. I mean, don't they? But in our social climate, that doesn't fly. I would say something like cancel Hamas, because it's kind of like you can't not agree with Black Lives Matter, and you also cannot not agree with cancel Hamas. It's like, you have a problem with that line? Like, why? So I would say something like that for sure.
Okay. And Noah, what arguments, if any, don't work? What arguments should people avoid, do you think, when talking about Israel?
It's funny because I up until the recent conflict, remind me to tell you something about conflict too, because that word is about to be reappropriated as well. So just want to warn everybody here on this Democratic Majority for Israel call. I wrote in the book that the whole context, concept of Hasbara sounding like, Israel has the right to defend itself, that it doesn't work, but like now maybe it does a little bit more. It's hard to tell right now. It's hard to tell right now. Let's get back to that question when the war subsides, because when the war subsides, let's see, when everything calms down, let's see what we need to do in the long-term strategy of this. But right now, anything, just throw anything at anybody, just see what happens and what works. Let me talk about the conflict for a second.
Yeah.
There's been a concerted effort, and again, not by accident, but by design. Whoever their creative minds are, they're just brilliant to reappropriate the word conflict. So now their reply on social media are, it's not a conflict, it's a genocide. It's not a conflict, it's ethnic cleansing. So just notice that they're trying to make it as if, like as if saying all lives matter. Obviously, you can't say that because it's not politically correct. They're trying to unpolitically correct. They're trying to do the same to the word conflict. You're like minimizing it. It's not a conflict. It's ethnic cleansing, which is absurd, as we know. Just by the number of growth of the population, people around in Israel and outside of Israel. I mean, really, it's just ridiculous. It's the worst ethnic cleansing in the history of ethnic cleansing. Sorry, I'm just being a little, I can't help myself, but just like, have a couple of jabs at it.
No, this was really a great conversation. It was sobering. It was honest, and we love your book. I hope as we look beyond the fighting, that you'll come back and join us again, and that we can work with you to figure out strategy going forward. Do you want to close with anything before I bring Mark back on to close us out of the event?
No, don't be disheartened by the fact that the book sold out on Amazon. You should just order it anyways.
That's great. Congratulations.
I don't know, because it's like right now, it's like I wrote the book for this. So, but it's all good. It's out there, and it's out there as ammunition for our community. I wrote this specifically it's for conservatives as well, but I wrote it as a liberal for liberals. So it's out there for anybody to use.
Great. And I think if we haven't yet, we will put a link in the chat for folks to buy the book. Thanks, Noah. Here, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Mellman, President and CEO of DMFI.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And Noah, thank you very much for a very inspirational and educational message. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you as well for joining us today. This has been, as Noah said, a very challenging week or 10 days for all of us, and obviously for Israel and the people of Israel as well. I want to say on behalf of Democratic Majority for Israel that we really are grateful for the bright spots here. President Biden and his administration have stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel. They've condemned Hamas. They've supported Israel's right to defend itself. We've heard that from the president himself. We've heard it from his press spokesperson. We've heard it from the Secretary of State. We've heard it from the Secretary of Defense. We've heard it from the administration. We've also heard it from our leaders in Congress, from the Democratic Speaker of the House, the Democratic Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, the chair of the Democratic Caucus as well, all up and down the Democratic Caucus. Obviously, there are some individuals in the party who don't stand as part of that consensus, but there is a broad consensus in the party, and we've heard from our leadership, again, very strong support for Israel, for its right to exist, its right to defend itself, and we've heard strong condemnation of Hamas. And the good news is that we just saw a poll this morning that was published by the Hill newspaper showing that Democrats and independents overwhelmingly approve of the way that President Biden is handling this conflict. So the grassroots of the Democratic Party is really with us as well. Again, not to minimize the danger that is posed by a relatively small but growing group of Democrats. And really, we're here to Democratic Majority for Israel is here to fight that battle. We and our separate sister organization, DMFI PAC, whether it's making sure that somebody like Richie Torres is in the United States Congress, or making sure that someone like Bernie Sanders is not the Democratic nominee for president. DMFI PAC has played that role. DMFI itself has been engaged with the White House, with Democratic members of Congress, with other leaders in our party to make sure that we continue to generate strong support for Israel. But we need you to help us in this fight. It's not something we can do. It's something alone. It's something we can all do together. So I do urge you to go to dmfi.org, click on our action alert page. You can find an easy way there to send emails to President Biden, to Democratic members of Congress, to thank them for their support, to urge those who haven't expressed support yet to do so. So again, very important to join us at dmfi.org, as well as on our social media channels. As Noah and Rachel said, this is an important front in the battle. We do a lot of work on social media with an excellent but small social media team. We need your support retweeting those tweets and commenting on them. Finally, I hope you'll join us on June 2nd at 2 p.m., where we'll be holding a conversation with Israel's ambassador to both the United Nations and the United States of America, Gilad Ardan. He will be, I think, a very interesting speaker as well. So please look out for more information on that event, as well as an invitation. Again, we thank you for joining us. We thank you for all your efforts. We hope we can count on you for future efforts as well, and look forward to having you join us for future programs here on Zoom. Thanks very much.
Thank you.